We're giving you every angle of Penn State, Wisconsin. We broke the game down earlier this week with a Wisconsin insider. We've had our own Greg Pickle come on the show and talk about it, and now we're going to get something close to my heart, near and dear to me, the analytics side. And to do that, Senior College Analyst for PFF, Anthony Treash, has come on the show today. Welcome, Anthony, to the BWI Daily Edition.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me on. Looking forward to this one. This is probably one of the more, even though they're both ranked teams, I think it's being an underrated game in this loaded week one slate. There's a lot of storylines to hit in this one. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, it's super exciting because it's such a big game so early, and two teams that I think are both similar enough that it should be, I think, a pretty close game, but also different enough that there's a bunch of storylines that you talked about. And one of your pieces this week that you were breaking down some of the games and some of the money lines and things like that. One of them featured was Penn State versus Wisconsin, and you got right to the meat of it when it comes to the matchup that matters in this game. Graham Mertz versus the talented Penn State secondary. So I'm going to get right to the question. From what you saw in 2020 with the up and down season, but knowing we've got to make projections, is Graham Mertz the guy?
I think I'm leaning towards that. I think we're going to see a much improved Graham Mertz than what we saw down the stretch last year.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a very interesting case study just because, his debut against Illinois was one of the best single game performances we saw by a quarterback last year. I mean, no uncatchable passes. That one incomplete pass was a drop. He looked the part there, but then reportedly suffered a shoulder injury the next game. And, that kind of explained a good amount of, it could have explained some of the struggles down the stretch there. He had to receive a back shot, regularly throughout the season just to get through it. And so, whether or not he can get back to that form that we saw in the debut against Illinois, that's really the $1 million question. It's going to be a tough test for him, too, because like you said, this talented Penn State secondary, safety Jaquan Brisker, one of the best defensive backs in college football. So it's not going to be easy for him either.
Yeah, you have to put the caveat in there, too. It was Illinois, and we all saw what Illinois was last year, so it is a really fascinating picture of a guy who's shown the most promise at Wisconsin for a team that has historically been talented at pretty much every position other than quarterback throughout their tenure over the last 10, 15 years in the Big Ten. So finding that guy has been really the challenge for that team, and to get kind of a murky picture because of the COVID, because of the injury, because of losing his top receivers last year throughout the season, it just is so confusing, and it's a small sample size too, and there's a lot of those guys in this game. But from the analytic perspective, from the big-time throw perspective, what did Mertz do last year, and how much of that do you take into account when you're looking at what he can do this year?
Yeah, and it just goes back to kind of what I was saying just a minute ago. It's kind of hard to kind of bake that all in because of all the, like you were saying too, the factors, the unknown factors of how much like each aspect and thing that went wrong weighed into the output. And I think I always go back, even though it was Illinois, he still looked phenomenal in that one game, to the point where I think that his ceiling is much higher than, kind of the broader consensus. He was not, an analytical darling at all after that game. I mean, he was clearly a different player. There were points in that second game where he kind of looked like his Illinois form. But after that hit happened, it just kind of went downhill the rest of the year. He graded out fairly low, the rest of the season. So, that's kind of the big thing with Wisconsin, is if we can kind of see that, the arm talent that he flashed early on in that accuracy, on a consistent basis. I mean, this is going to be a really dangerous Wisconsin team. It's just a really big if. So, from a grading perspective, it wasn't all that great throughout the whole course and duration of the season. But we saw spurts of it, and it's kind of hard to kind of project that right now. Just like what I was saying, there's so many factors and things that went wrong. It's just kind of all about the weight of each thing. We don't really quite know at this moment in time. But kind of comparing them to someone like, say Sean Clifford, right? Penn State's quarterback. We have a good sample of Sean Clifford throughout his career, and we kind of know what he is, what kind of player he is. You were mentioning the big time throw perspective. He's never been that kind of guy. Last year, ranked near the bottom of the Power 5 in big time throw percentage, and then from a turnover worthy play percentage, put the ball in harm's way on a consistent basis. And his downfield accuracy was pretty shoddy. We've seen enough from him to kind of know that. With Graham Mertz, we still need to see a little bit more before we can kind of get comfortable with the kind of, the long-term projection for him. throughout his career at Wisconsin.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring up that big time throw percentage, because that is something. If you go to Premium Stats 2.0 PFF.com, we're here with Anthony Treash of PFF, looking at the data about these quarterbacks and this matchup between a guy who is in his 5th year at Penn State and a guy who is starting his 2nd year as a starter at Wisconsin, and you feel like the guy from Wisconsin has the upper hand. You feel like Graham Mertz is the better prospect. He's the guy that has the higher ceiling. Everything Anthony just said. When it comes to Sean Clifford, though, and the quality of downfield passes that he had versus in previous years, does that come into factor when you look at the big time throw percentage and the opportunities to throw the ball down the field into a better situation? Do guys develop over time that big time throw percentage, or once that baseline is established, is that kind of who a guy is?
Yeah, I think it's very unique. It depends on the very situation, right? It depends on the scheme they're in. The receivers they have around them. What kind of arm talent they actually have at their disposal. For example, in Wisconsin's case, that their former quarterback Jack Cohn, now the quarterback at Notre Dame. I think he's always been a guy that he's not going to produce those exciting throws downfield, right? He's not going to lead to
Right.
an explosive passing offense just because that he struggles with the vertical ball, very much so. But sometimes it just kind of depending on the system you're in. You have some of these offenses, you're going to have a low average depth of target. The Mississippi State, for example, Mike Leach's air raid, they're just going to have just need that underneath accuracy. That's the big thing there. With someone like Sean Clifford, I think this is more of the situation where this is just kind of the type of player he is and type of passer he is, and the situation he's in doesn't help matters any really either. I'm kind of intrigued to see what kind of success this Penn State receiving unit has. Obviously Jahan Dotson, one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten Conference. He is a little bit limited than some of the other guys athletically, but his ball skills, they're certainly there. Productive player last year, and I think he's going to continue to be that high floor type of player for Sean Clifford. It's just whether or not the rest of the group around him can continue to be get up to that kind of level and kind of help elevate that offense. But if that doesn't really happen, then we're not going to really see a very explosive passing offense with Penn State.
Yeah, and the receivers, certainly outside of Parker Washington, who was a guy who flashed as a true freshman, played last year in Kirk Shiraka's offense, who's now moved on from Penn State, and Jahan Dotson. Outside of those two, it's really a grab bag of guys that have good pedigrees from recruiting, but we haven't seen anything from truly on the football field. And that's where I'm curious as to your thoughts on Mike Yurcich's offense from, Oklahoma State with Mason Rudolph and James Washington to last year with Sam Ehlinger at Texas. He's produced downfield throws and opportunities for his quarterbacks at a pretty high clip. So he's an aggressive guy that likes to throw the ball down the field. How much can that system help a quarterback who is more limited or has issues with that? Like Ehlinger, I don't think any of us would have considered him an elite passer of the football last year, but performed admirably. And do you see a similarity to what Clifford might be able to do in this Yurcich offense?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting, and I think that's kind of where my concerns lie with this Penn State offense, right?
Yeah.
Just because, not to like beat a dead horse, but I'm just not too confident in Sean Clifford being able to produce those kind of throws. Sam Ehlinger, I think, like you said, he wasn't the most talented passer, but he could get the job done. With Sean
Right.
Clifford, I'm not so sure he can kind of even get to that kind of level, and that's what I'm really concerned about, with this team. But hopefully he proves me wrong, and at the end of the day, we can kind of see him have some success in this type of offense. But, given what we've seen thus far, I'm not too confident in him being able to do so.
Yeah, and that's going to be a big determining factor for this year, not just in this game against Wisconsin, which is bringing back 4 seniors or COVID seniors with 6 years of playing experience. So it's going to be a very tough test on Saturday. But another guy who has a great pedigree, and you mentioned him earlier, Jaquan Brisker. What is it that he does that made him a PFF All-American last year, and what do you like about his game?
Yeah, I mean, he's just an all-around fantastic safety. I mean, the draft community absolutely loves him, and it's understandably so. I mean, he's graded out exceptionally well over the last couple of years, 85.0 plus grades against the run and in coverage over the last couple of seasons collectively. No other Power 5 safety has done so. I mean, his tackling is some of the best tackling that we've really ever seen in the PFF college era. It's actually the second best rate what he had last year, just a 1.7% missed tackle rate. So he's just the full package, right? He's just everything that you want, a reliable body on the back in there. He's just, and that just kind of is an all-encompassing what Penn State really needs on that defense. And he's going to be, I would expect him to be, a type of first-team All-American type of candidate this upcoming season too, especially with the talent he has around him as well. Even that defensive line, I was very impressed with what they were able to do, going into the transfer portal and getting some really, proven bodies there. Even though you lose guys like Shaka Toney and Odafe Owe, that's still going to be a very talented pass rush unit. And when you have someone like Jaquan Brisker, with the defensive backs there, just an all-around great player, I think that makes this defense really exciting, and it's going to make it tough on Graham Mertz in week one.
And it's a deep secondary too, picking up a couple guys that were a little bit under the radar. Johnny Dixon, a former high 4-star corner. They bring in AJ Litton as well, and Kalen King has been impressing as a true freshman high 4-star corner. So the cornerback position is stocked and deep, and Brisker is in the center of that and is poised for a big season. And I think I know, kind of based on what we've talked about already, your opinion on this, but I do want to ask you, you had a bounce back players for 2021 article a little bit earlier this week, and we talked already about Sean Clifford, but as a team, do you think Penn State can bounce back from 2020?
Yeah, I really don't think they can. And, it's going to make things interesting, with James Franklin there. I mean, looking at their first, 6 games or so, they have some really tough ones. Of course, they have, Villanova, that's going to be an easy win for them. But, I wouldn't sleep on, teams like Wisconsin or Ball State or even Auburn, for example. Even though Ball State's a group of 5 team, they're a very talented group of 5 team, very good offense, return all their top production. Auburn, Bo Nix, not the best quarterback, shaky at wide receiver, but that secondary is one of the best secondaries in college football. And then after that Nova game, you get Indiana and Iowa. Again, 2 really tough defenses. I think that we're going to see a pretty inefficient passing offense. Kind of going back to what I've been saying this entire time. I think that's a really big concern. So I don't think that we're going to see, a pretty significant bounce back. I would not be surprised, if they do finish, just a flat 500 for the regular season, and I would be I would be kind of surprised, but I wouldn't be too surprised if it's something around 5-7. Again, hopefully they prove me wrong. There's definitely, like you said, the recruiting pedigree is there. The body is in the raw potential. It's all there. It's just all about player development. But given what we've seen thus far, it's going to be. Hey, I'm a little concerned with this Penn State team, but again, hopefully they prove me wrong, and it's going to be a tough test for them, over those first, 6 and even 8 weeks there, including that Ohio State game.
So going off of that, small sample size players that we've seen good things from in little spurts. Juice Scruggs at right guard played well down the stretch for Penn State, kind of opened eyes for Penn State football fans. Caden Wallace, another guy with a good pedigree, is going to start at right tackle. So you've got those 2 guys on the right side with limited experience. Curtis Jacobs, another guy who's going to slip into that Sam linebacker role and looked very good in small spurts. How do you handle small sample sizes from players like that, and what do you take away from those small samples from one year to the next?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely unique, case by case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about position by position even too, because, if they're an offensive lineman, it's, what kind of opportunities do they see within that small sample, right? Were they pretty protected within the scheme they were in, or they have one of those, a lot of those true pass set opportunities where you saw the one-on-ones and isolated them, because, a small sample size player on the offensive line, realistically, you could see someone that played maybe, for example, if someone played a third of a season versus comparing them to someone that played it for a full season, they could have the same amount of true pass set opportunities depending on the offense they're in. So
yeah,
it's definitely case by case and even opponent by opponent too, just because there's such a stark difference in play at the Power 5 level compared to the Group of 5 level. And so you want to kind of weigh those Power 5 games a little bit more. It's not baked into the PFF grades that you'll see on a weekly basis, this upcoming season. But it is something to consider when you see some of these teams go up against some of the weaker competition, in the non-conference portion of their schedule. So it's definitely unique, scenario by scenario, and also the position that they play. how to kind of weigh that, the opportunities and the reps that they actually got within that small sample.
Yeah, and to your point, Caden Wallace, despite having almost 500 snaps under his belt, less than 100 true pass sets. So that's going to be, there's always a Chase Young, there's always an Aiden Hutchinson or a Rashawn Gary out there in the Big Ten East. So he's going to be tested this year. And in this game in particular, the outside linebackers for Wisconsin are shaping up to be very talented. From that side, from their defense and their defensive front, what guys are you keying on looking at them in this game?
Yeah, so I mean, for Wisconsin on defense, I mean, there's definitely a lot of talented players there. They definitely did lose some people, but Keanu Benton, the nose tackle, I think he has a chance to be a really special player. He's been a very inconsistent player, but he does have even NFL potential. There's no doubt about that. Their off-ball linebackers are some of the best in the entire country as well. Jack Sandsborn, very good player. You pair him with Leo Chenal, some of the best blitzing players at the position. And Wisconsin's definitely going to utilize that. There's no doubt about that. They're going to be sending, having some interesting blitz packages for Sean Clifford to pick up. That's something I'm definitely keying in on this one. So those are really like the three defensive players that I'm really looking forward to watching there. And like I was saying, they're going to put the pressure on Sean Clifford. They're definitely will. They're going to get interesting with the way they do that.
So if you want to, you can give us a quick prediction here. I know the over-under was at 50. What do you have there on the point total, and then what's your prediction for the game?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely 50 is definitely tough here. I would probably lean on the underside, but that might be something to stay away from. But for the game, I think it's probably a Wisconsin victory. For all the reasons that I've kind of talked about with Sean Clifford and the offense that they're in, and also this Wisconsin defense. I think that we're probably going to see him, try to get creative with his legs. He's going to have to. I think. It's going to be. I think it's going to be a very interesting one, but I'm leaning a little bit more on the Wisconsin side, just because even though there is plenty of question marks with Graham Mertz, we still don't know what kind of quarterback he is. There's that slimmer of chance and that ceiling that we've seen before that I think that he could possibly recoup in that unknown with the missing some time with COVID last year and of course the injury that I talked about earlier. So I think given that unknown, that nature, I'd be more willing to pick Wisconsin here, but I think it will be a close one, at least for the first few quarters.
So I want to get to some non-Penn State Wisconsin things because there's some interesting stuff in your bold takes from, I think it was last week at PFF.com. So if you want to read anything from Anthony, PFF.com, and you can check out what he does there, and at PFF Anthony on Twitter. Your bold predictions. This is we mentioned the receiver position in the Big Ten. The Ohio State receiving room to you is?
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, the best. I think when it's all said and done, we'll be saying this group's better than what we saw with Alabama in 2019. And
Wow.
I think we're all on the same page. That was the best receiving room, obviously, 4 first-round players. You look at guys like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. Chris Olave could have came out this past season, possibly would have been a first-round talent. He would have been a first-round prospect in our eyes here at PFF. Decided to come back. Those two are some of the best route runners in the game. They're ranked number 1 and number 2 in our returning wide receiver rankings. And then you have a bunch of just so much potential within that receiving room too. I mean, Jackson Smith and Jigba, he flashed. He has a short area quicks and the ball skills there. Against Nebraska, had one of the best touchdown grabs of the entire season. Only ran, I think it was under 100 routes on the year, but he's going to be on the field there with Olave and Wilson. And I think that trio is going to put up incredible numbers. And then you have, a second unit there with 2 of the top 10 prospects at the position in the last decade. And then you also have Marvin Harrison's son, Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think there's so much potential within that receiving room. I think at least 4 of those guys, out of that 6, or we've already seen 2 of them do it. I think the third, Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think he's on his way to be there. I think he has the potential to be even better than Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And if you get one of those other 3 in the second unit, I think you're putting them on that same stratosphere with the Alabama 2019 group.
And it's the early scouting report for Penn State fans to know that it's not going to get any easier with just because it's a freshman quarterback doesn't mean that they're not loaded at other positions at Ohio State. Speaking of quarterbacks, Spencer Rattler, according to you, your bold take, Spencer Rattler will?
Yeah, I think he's going to win the Heisman and lead Oklahoma to their first national championship. Oklahoma, they've always been a contender. There's no doubt about that. For the 7 years of the CFP, they've been there. They haven't won a semifinal game yet. I think they're going to do that with Spencer Rattler. I think he's the clear-cut best returning college quarterback. There's definitely there were some undisciplined moments that he had in his redshirt freshman campaign last year. Leading that team, but it was his first year, underclassman, leading the offense. And those undisciplined moments were mostly early on in the season and got cleaned up as the year progressed. What he can do out of structure, his playmaking ability, it's on the same level, even his arm talent. It's on the same level as Patrick Mahomes. He reminds me a lot of Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech. I'm not saying he's going to be, the immediate impact MVP player when he gets to the NFL. But what he can do out of the pocket is truly special. Some of the arm angles he has, that quick release. He's just a very rare talent. If he can just improve his footwork in the pocket and stop being so willing to take sacks, I really do think that would take him from the already elite player to probably in the conversation for one of the highest graded players we've ever seen at the position, PFF college era. And you look at the talent that's surrounding him in the wide receiver room. Marvin Mims, true freshman last year, one of the top 10 returning wide receivers in all of college football. You also have Jaden Hasselwood, a lot of potential there. The defense too, the secondary. I mean, we kind of come to expect with Oklahoma over the years that they're not going to have a secondary that's considered one of the best in college football, and that's the case again this year. I think that kind of group is looking like an average one. But you look at the pass rush they have. I think that's on the same level as Ohio State's. Those two, I think, are going to be neck and neck for the best pass rush in college football. And, finding, over the offseason, I kind of dug into this because, like I was talking about earlier, there's a very stark difference between Power 5 and Group of 5 level, right? I think that they should even be completely separated just because of the talent and the athleticism. It's so much different, the disparity there. And you look at, pass rush versus coverage, some of the athletes at the Power 5 level along the defensive line, they're so gifted, that can make that portion, that facet very valuable. I mean, it's a lot more, it explains more in a given pass play, the impact of the pass rush has at the Power 5 level than it does in the NFL. I mean, it's near equal with the coverage unit. So I think that group is so special that the defense is going to be, a pretty decent one. And when you have that with one of, if not, I would say at this moment in time, easily the best offense in college football, it's hard not to roll with them. So, I'm very high on Spencer Rattler. I think, he's going to get the job done for him this year.
PFF Anthony Treash joining the BWI Daily Edition, and he's saying, buckle up, Penn State fans. It's going to be a bumpy ride this season. Thank you for coming on. Give us your insight into the data and the analysis on the Penn State football team.
Of course. Thank you for having me on.
This is the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We will be back again tomorrow.